As we come to the end of this series on the signs of a vital and healthy church, I want to spend a few moments talking about the most important piece of what makes for a healthy church that underlies all of it, and that is our ability to really listen to God, to hear and to see what God is telling us, our ability to get on board with what God is doing in our lives and our world. And so I begin by reading to you from the book of 1 Samuel, chapter 3, verses 1 through 11. Please listen for the word of God. The boy Samuel ministered before the Lord under Eli. In those days, the word of the Lord was rare. There were not many visions. One night, Eli, whose eyes were becoming so weak that he could barely see, was lying down in his usual place. The lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord, where the ark of God was. Then the Lord called Samuel. Samuel answered, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." But Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." So he went and lay down. Again, the Lord called Samuel. And Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." "My son," Eli said, "I did not call. Go back and lie down." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him. A third time the Lord called Samuel, and Samuel got up and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." And then Eli realized that the Lord was calling the boy. So Eli told Samuel, "Go and lie down, and if he calls you, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. The Lord came and stood there, calling as at the other times, "Samuel, Samuel." Then Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant is listening." And the Lord said to Samuel, "See, I am about to do something in Israel that will make the ears of everyone who hears about it tingle." I love that. And this is the word of the Lord. There is obviously a world of difference, isn't there, between hearing and really listening. Hearing means simply that sound waves go into your ear and your eardrum vibrates and that snail-shaped thing in your head gets stimulated and a signal goes to your brain. Listening, really listening and hearing, is something altogether different. It's the same kind of difference between seeing and perceiving, isn't it? Or knowing and understanding. We see this all the time around our house when our kids are learning new piano pieces. There are the scales and the exercises that are all done by rote that creates that muscle memory that becomes the foundation of everything else that gets built upon it. But when our kids are actually learning a new piece, especially when it's one that's difficult and intricate, there always seems to come that moment, and there is no mistaking when it comes, when suddenly it is no longer just notes in our house. That moment when the actual music starts to hum through our rooms, like some kind of harmonic resonance. That moment when all of the hand places and note memorizations and all of the transitions and the metronomic timing all seems to melt away, and this beautiful song. This incredible music just seems to emerge and ring through our house. Just coming into the sanctuary today, I feel the same thing. I mean, it is one thing to see your faces on Zoom. It is a whole other thing to see your faces in person. But you know what? It's an altogether different thing to see your faces sitting and standing next to each other. It was almost like a vision this morning. It was almost, as they were standing up here, I could almost see the energy, the glow, the harmonic resonance between you. In that space between you, as you all are no longer disconnected squares on the screen, but you're sitting next to each other and you're standing next to each other, and that energy between you is palpable. If there's anything that this story about God's calling on Samuel's life reveals to us, it's that we can be sitting in the pews every Sunday, going to every committee meeting, even preaching in the pulpit. Heck, you could be sleeping next to the Ark of the Covenant and still not really understand what God is up to. The story starts off by saying that the word of the Lord was rare in those days. Well, we certainly know what that feels like, don't we? In 21st century America. Churches shrinking, budgets straining, less and less people coming as we try to get you all back here after 16 months of lockdown and quarantine and multiple pandemics. But it also says in this passage that the lamp of God had not yet gone out, that there is still hope. And it says that young Samuel, who scholars think was probably about 12 years old at this point, was sleeping on the floor of the Holy of Holies, next to the ark, when God calls Samuel. And Samuel hears something, right? He certainly realizes that someone is trying to get his attention, and so he runs to Eli, his mentor and his boss, and he says, "Here I am, you need something?" And Eli's like, "You're dreaming, kid. Go back to sleep." So Samuel does, but then it happens again. And again, Eli's like, "You're killing me. It's almost dawn. Would you go and get some sleep?" And then it happens again, like some Laurel and Hardy skit. And it's so interesting because it says in verse 7, "Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord. The word of the Lord had not yet been revealed to him." And again, what this is telling us is that you can spend your whole life coming to church, singing these songs, praying these prayers, listening to these sermons, and still not really know God or what God is wanting to do in your life or through you, in our church, in our world. We Presbyterians, we're all about community, but there is a very personal component to our faith in God that can't be nurtured just by showing up on Sundays or getting involved in all of the committees or programs. And it all begins when we become serious about trying to hear God's voice, speaking to the recesses of our own hearts. And as clueless as Eli is at times, this third time, he either wakes up enough to realize what's going on, or he's just finally dawning on him what's happening. And so he's like, "Oh my gosh, Samuel, go lie back down, and if you hear the voice again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" And it does happen again. And this time, God says Samuel's name twice. "Samuel, Samuel." And this is no accident. When God called Abraham when he was about to sacrifice Isaac, do you remember what he said? "Abraham, Abraham." The next time we see it is at the burning bush, as God is calling Moses into ministry. "Moses, Moses." He calls out to Samuel, and Samuel responds, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." What a great prayer that is for any of us, anytime. Before we open up the Bible, before worship begins, as we're sitting in the pews, gathering ourselves, as we settle in to listen to an amazing sermon, speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. And God says, "See, Samuel, I am about to do something in your land, in your life, in this nation, that when people hear about it, their ears are going to tingle." God never stops speaking. We simply stop hearing. If there's anything that these last 16 months have taught us, it's that God is going to keep moving. And he's going to keep this world moving, with or without us. We can wake up and look around. We can see what's happening, what's going on around us. We can get on board with what God is up to, or we can go back to sleep and wait for that voice to call out again. A few verses later, we didn't read it, but when Samuel tells Eli what God said to him, which was a scathing indictment on Eli's unfaithfulness and that of his kids, at least Eli has the sense to say, "Give it to me straight. I am tired of living with my head in the sand. Tell me everything that God said and don't leave one bit out." And when Samuel does, I think it's actually pretty cool of Eli to say, "He is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes." You think? God will keep building God's kingdom. God will keep moving this world forward, whether we are on board with it or not. I can't shake this nagging feeling that I have, like we are in one of those Samuel moments right now. Like God is on the move, with or without us. And that our job isn't so much trying to figure out where the church is headed or what the next trends are in this post-pandemic days, but to figure out what God is doing and what God is wanting from us, and to get on board and to become a part of it. And this has a very personal component. What lessons has God been teaching you this past year and a half? Where in your life do you think God may have been trying to get your attention? Are there things this past year and a half that have been like, well, a wake-up call for you? I wonder if that is where the term even came from. A wake-up call about how to conduct your career, maybe? Or treat your family? Or your friends? How to care for yourself or those around you? How to appreciate what you have? How to live your life? Don't ignore those lessons. We may not believe that God causes bad things to make good things come out of them, but we do believe that God is always speaking to us, and will certainly not waste a deadly pandemic or a worldwide lockdown or a Me Too movement or a racial reckoning or a political upheaval. What are the lessons and the insights that God is trying to wake you up to? And how can we use the lessons of these past months to see what God is trying to do, what God is wanting to do in our world and in our lives? But then there's also a corporate component to this as well. Look, it has been no big secret that the Church of Jesus Christ has been struggling in the West for quite some time now. We may have seen it in Europe first, as these huge cathedrals open their doors with only a handful of people in a couple first pews. But here in our country, we aren't very far behind. What are the lessons that we as a church are supposed to be hearing from all that is going on around us? What is God's message to us? What is God trying to do? And how can we get on board and become a part of it? Now, we may have all different ideas about what's coming next, and that's okay. But I do believe that I think we can all agree that simply going back to the way things were, back to the status quo, is not an option. But whatever it is that God has next for us, it has something to do with the life that is described in here. What in this book is just the way you're living your life right now? And what in this book is calling you to something different? What in this book is the way that our nation is put together and conducting its business? And what in this book is telling us that things need to change? What are the things that we need to let go of? And what are the things that we need to double down on? What is God up to? Again, for all of us, this is going to be different. But what I can tell you is that this is a time for us to be more alert than ever. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. How do our lives in 21st century America look different than the way it's described in this book? What could we be doing to help God's kingdom come a little bit closer to this earth in our time? I know for me, this doctoral program at Duke has opened my eyes to some things inside of the church that I think are going to have to die before we can begin to see something new emerge. There are many heresies that have been baked into our structure over these last 2,000 years, or at least ever since Constantine. Heresies that have to do with this greedy, individualistic, judgmental, male-dominated, hierarchical, power-hungry, top-down, Western, white, colonial control and domination of everything. I feel like I can see so clearly so much of what the church in the West became are the very things that Jesus came to this earth to speak out against and fight back at. I feel like we are seeing some of our favorite and most carefully protected heresies coming back to roost, as people are beginning to see how hypocritical and unchristlike the Church of Jesus Christ can be, and how things won't get better until we come to terms with what of our Western models of Christianity are from God and what just aren't, which is both scary and exciting all at the same time. I found myself, as part of this program these days, reading a lot more Desmond Tutu again, Mother Teresa, St. Augustine, Pope Francis, and St. Francis. A bunch of radicals, really. But you know what a radical is, don't you? It comes from the Latin word radix, which means root. Like a radish is a root vegetable. The radical is not the person who's begun something new or wandered off the path deep into the woods. The radical is the one who's gone back to the origins, the roots of how it all began. And what I keep finding is all of these radicals are in their own way talking about the same thing, what Tutu calls Ubuntu. How we really are all tied together in one inseparable bundle of life. How we really are all intimately connected to one another, however hard we may try to deny it. And that if one is hurt, or oppressed, or demeaned, or forgotten, whether here on the streets of LA or in the farthest reaches of Afghanistan or Timbuktu, We all suffer. It is never enough to just say, well, that's just the way things are. Doing the right thing is not always easy, but it is always the right thing. Whether you are Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Nazi Germany, or Mother Teresa on the streets of Calcutta, if you're Pope Francis in Vatican City, the Gaza Strip, the U.S.-Mexico border, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, or Harry Weinstein's couch. This is at the heart of Rob Bell's newest book, Everything is Spiritual. We were actually going back and forth on whether we were going to do Holy Envy next or this book next. But this book, it also talks about how everything is connected, how everything in the world, even the matter that makes up our bodies, is spiritual. He busts out into this incredible lesson on astrophysics, talking about the interconnected relational nature of everything, how all of us and everything around us is just an infinitely complex relationship of particles that have joined together to create atoms, of atoms that have joined together to create molecules, of molecules that have joined together to create cells, of cells that have joined together to create us. And how it's all interrelated in a way that we still don't understand. And how it's in our very nature to keep coming together, to create more and more complex relationships. But again, what I am seeing is not necessarily what you should be seeing. So what is it for you? Where in your life are you hearing God calling your name? What does that next step in your journey of faith look like? Because there always is a next step. What is God wanting you to wake up to and hear? To really listen and see and understand about what God is up to in your life and in our world. Because God is not through with us yet, and God will not let any difficult season like we have just been through go to waste. And there is still time for us to learn some new lessons and to make some changes and to get on board with what God is doing in our world and our lives before we are through here. If we will just take the time to really listen. Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening. Amen.